I've always liked being alone in the woods. The quiet, the smell of pine and earth, the sound of wind through the trees. It's calming. Not everyone gets it, but I do. I spend as much time as I can hiking, camping, exploring places where most people don't bother to go. Last summer, I decided to do a longer solo trip in a part of the forest I'd never been to before. A remote patch deep in the mountains, miles from any trailhead or road. The plan was simple. I packed light but with everything I needed: a good tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, map, compass, and a flashlight with extra batteries. My phone was mostly useless there. No signal for miles. I told a few people where I was going, but no one was coming with me. I liked it that way. I left early in the morning with my backpack snug and my boots tight, ready for a week in the wild. The first 2 days went fine. The forest was dense, filled with tall firs and thick underbrush. The air was cool and damp. Birds chirped, squirrels darted between branches, and every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of a deer moving quietly. I kept track of my progress carefully, using the map and compass to avoid getting lost. I set up camp near a small stream the first night, the sound of running water comforting. My tent was small but sturdy, and I slept well under the dark canopy. On the third day, things began to feel different. I don't know exactly when it started, but there was a change in the atmosphere. The forest seemed quieter. The usual sounds of birds and animals stopped. It was like the woods held its breath. The light filtering through the trees was dimmer, almost gray, even though the sky was clear. The air felt heavier. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe it was just a trick of my mind, or the deeper I went, the less wildlife there was. But I noticed something else. My footsteps didn't sound right. When I walked, there was no crack of twigs or rustling of leaves underfoot. It was as if the ground was soft, dead, almost sponge-like. The trail was faint, and sometimes I couldn't find it at all. I checked my compass and map again. I was still on course, but I felt like the forest was swallowing me. By late afternoon, I was near a ridge that overlooked a deep valley below. I stopped to rest and eat some trail mix, sitting on a fallen log. From there, I could see for miles trees stretching endlessly in all directions. I tried to relax, taking deep breaths, but a feeling of being watched crept over me. I scanned the treetops and the shadows between the trunks, but saw nothing. I packed up and kept moving. The sun was lower now, and the forest turned a dull orange. I wanted to find a place to camp before dark, but no matter how far I walked, I didn't find a good spot. The ground was rocky and uneven, or covered in thick bushes. I finally chose a small clearing near an old, dead tree that looked like a giant skeleton reaching toward the sky. Setting up my tent was harder than usual. My hands shook a little, though I told myself it was just tiredness. As I hammered the stakes into the ground, I heard a crack, like a branch breaking nearby. I froze, listening. Nothing else. The wind was still. No animals stirred. The silence felt unnatural. That night, I lay inside my tent, the thin nylon walls barely muffling the sounds outside. I had my flashlight and a knife close by. The forest was so dark, the shadows outside thick and alive. I tried to ignore the feeling of eyes on me. I told myself I was imagining things. I wasn't alone out here, but I was safe. I tried to sleep, but every little noise made me jump. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. There was a noise outside, soft footsteps, slow and careful. Someone or something was moving near my tent. I held my breath, gripping the knife. The footsteps circled the tent once, twice, then stopped. I didn't dare look. The silence came back, heavier than before. I lay there for hours, listening. The footsteps never returned. When the sky started to lighten, I finally drifted off. The next morning, I packed up fast. I wanted to leave this place, but as I tried to find the trail, I realized I didn't know which way to go. The forest looked different. The trees seemed to have moved overnight. The landmarks I'd used were gone or changed. Panic set in. I tried the compass. It worked fine, but the landscape didn't match my map anymore. I started walking, hoping to find the trail or some sign of it. I was sure I had been here before, but nothing was familiar. Hours passed. I was hungry and thirsty, but I had little left. The sun was high now, burning through the canopy, making the forest hot and sticky. Then I heard it. Faint voices, human voices. I stopped, heart pounding. I called out, but no reply. I moved toward the sound, pushing through thick bushes. The voices stopped. Nothing. Just the forest again. I wandered for another day, growing weaker and more desperate. My boots were soaked, my legs scratched and bruised. I tried to stay calm, but every shadow looked like a person hiding, every crack a footstep behind me. On the third day lost, I finally saw something. A small cabin, old and run down, barely visible behind trees. I rushed to it, hoping for help. The door was slightly open. Inside, the cabin was empty, except for some old furniture and scraps of food. But on the floor, I saw marks, footprints, smeared dirt, and broken branches. I sat down, trying to catch my breath. I realized I wasn't alone in these woods. Someone had been here recently, or maybe they still were. As night fell again, I stayed in the cabin. I made a fire, eating the scraps I found. I heard noises outside, low grunts, branches snapping, heavy footsteps. I stayed awake all night, knife in hand. The next day, I decided to leave. I found a narrow path leading away from the cabin. It was faint but looked traveled. I followed it, hoping it led to a road or civilization. Days passed. I survived on rainwater and what little food I had left. I kept hearing footsteps behind me, but whenever I looked, no one was there. The feeling of being hunted was constant. On the fifth day, I saw smoke in the distance, a campfire, maybe a hunting party. Relief washed over me. I moved toward it cautiously. When I reached the clearing, there were no people, just abandoned tents and a fire pit still warm. My heart sank. Someone had been here, but they left in a hurry. I sat down, exhausted and defeated. That night, I heard a strange sound, a low growl, like an animal but not quite. I shone my flashlight into the trees. I saw nothing, but the feeling of eyes watching me was stronger than ever. I decided I couldn't wait anymore. I had to keep moving. On the sixth day, I stumbled out of the forest onto a dirt road. My clothes were torn, my face scratched and dirty, but I was alive. A car passed by and I waved it down. They took me to the nearest town. I told my story to the police, but they didn't believe everything I said. They said the woods were known for dangerous hunters and illegal logging. Some people disappeared there. I never found out who or what those footsteps belonged to, or the growling sound I heard. Now, I don't go into the woods alone anymore. I stick to well-marked trails. I still love nature, but something about that deep forest changed me. It's not just the fear of getting lost. It's the feeling that something is watching, waiting. Something real and dangerous, hiding just beyond sight. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear footsteps behind me, soft and careful. And I know I'll never forget what I felt in those woods. A cold, silent hunt that almost ended me. I've always had a habit of pushing things a little too far, especially when it came to urban exploration. Some people bungee jump, others dive with sharks. I crawl through forgotten buildings at night. There's something about decaying wood, dust-covered furniture, and long-forgotten corners of a building that gives me the kind of adrenaline other people get from roller coasters. But this one night in that church, I think I finally found the edge of that thrill, where excitement slips into regret. This happened maybe 6 years ago. I was living just outside a medium-sized city, not too far from the woods. The area had gone through a period of development in the 80s that never really stuck, and that left behind a lot of half-abandoned structures scattered along the outskirts. Old motels, trailer parks, industrial storage, and one big church that had caught my eye more than once. It sat at the end of a cracked and crumbling access road that was mostly overtaken by weeds and pine needles, the kind of road that disappears into the tree line. I'd driven past it before during daylight and taken a few pictures from outside, but something about going in during the day felt cheap. So I put it off, saved it, like it needed the right conditions. It was early autumn when I finally went in. The weather had cooled enough to keep the bugs down, and the nights were longer, which I liked. That meant fewer people out, fewer chances of being caught trespassing. That night, I drove up to the church around 11 p.m., parked maybe a quarter-mile away, and walked the rest with a headlamp, flashlight, and my old Nikon camera slung around my neck. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and there was a constant wind pushing through the trees, making everything sway and groan. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the gravel and wet leaves. The church itself was something between Gothic and modern, plain, gray concrete walls with little detail. The stained glass was long gone, and plywood had been nailed over the windows years before. Some had fallen off, others were hanging loosely. The front doors were still standing, though one had cracked off its hinge and was leaning against the wall like someone had tried to take it off completely and just gave up. The second I stepped inside, the sound changed. Outside, the wind was constant. Inside, it was dead quiet, like the thick walls were holding everything out. The sanctuary was massive, even in the dark. My headlamp lit up dust motes in the air, and I could see rows of pews in different stages of decay. Some intact, others split and rotted through. At the far end was what I assumed was the pulpit, a raised semicircular platform ringed by old wood that had been painted white but was now gray with grime and time. It looked like any other part of an old church, until I stepped closer and saw what was on the floor. There, in the center of the circular stage, was a strange pattern etched or carved into the wood. Not anything too ornate, just a raised edge with a smaller circle in the middle, like where a podium used to sit. What made me stop was the fact that it was stained. Not dark with mold or water damage, but red, wet, fresh. It was blood. I didn't have to guess. It had pooled a bit near the center, streaked in lines where it had run outward. It wasn't a lot, maybe a pint or two, but it was fresh enough that it hadn't even dried fully. I knelt down, being careful not to step in it, and angled my flashlight. It wasn't just dropped there. It had been spilled or dripped in a specific spot. Some of it had soaked into the cracks between the boards. Whatever happened, it hadn't been long ago. That was when I should have left. I knew it. My stomach tightened, and my brain went from thrill to caution. But I didn't leave. Not yet. I told myself I'd just walk the rest of the place and head out. I checked the first floor. Offices, classrooms, a dusty nursery room with a half-collapsed crib. Nothing unusual, quiet as death. Then I found the stairwell to the basement. Now, most old church basements are where the real rot is. Water collects down there, pipes leak, animals burrow in and die. But I've seen worse. So I clicked my flashlight back on and started down. The basement smelled like mold and iron. My boots clapped on the cement steps, then sunk into a carpet of leaves and dirt that had blown in through some open vent. There were rows of rusted metal chairs, an old piano missing most of its keys, boxes of papers and hymnals that had dissolved into mush. A small kitchen area had collapsed in on itself. I walked deeper in, shining the light on old bulletin boards and forgotten junk. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, fast, deliberate, upstairs. It wasn't just a creak or a pop. I know those sounds. This was running. Heavy boots slamming against wood floorboards directly above where I was standing. I froze. The sound moved from one side of the sanctuary to the other, maybe 20 feet across, then stopped. I killed my flashlight instantly and crouched down behind one of the boxes. I held my breath, listened. Nothing. 10 seconds. 20. Then again running. Back the other way. My first instinct was that I wasn't alone. Some other explorer maybe. A squatter. But I hadn't seen any sign of anyone. No bikes. No fresh footprints outside. Nothing. Whoever it was hadn't called out or flashed a light. Just ran. I waited in that basement, crouched behind that box, for maybe 5 minutes. My thighs started to burn. I didn't move. Eventually, I turned my headlamp back on, slowly, and made my way toward the stairs. I didn't make a sound, even though my knees cracked with every step. I poked my head up first, then crept back into the main hall. Empty. Totally empty. The air smelled faintly like smoke and rust. The blood on the floor was still wet, untouched. I scanned the room again. No signs of life. No tracks in the dust. But I didn't linger. I left the church through the broken door and walked fast, borderline jogging, back to the road. I didn't hear anything follow me, didn't see anything in the trees. But that entire walk, I kept thinking about that blood, about how fresh it was, about the running. I didn't post the pictures anywhere, didn't tell anyone for a long time. There was one photo that stuck with me, a wide shot of that circular platform, stained red and ringed by rot. I kept it in a folder on my PC labeled just Old Church _2017. It was the only one I didn't delete. A few months later, that tower fried in a lightning storm. I didn't even think about the church again until last year, when I finally pulled the old hard drive and checked what I could recover. That picture was still there, still labeled, still clear. I thought maybe it was time to go back. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe it was just bad timing. So last October, I made the trip again. Drove the same road, parked in the same spot, walked the same path. But when I got there, the church was gone, flattened. Nothing but a few low piles of crushed cinder block and wood. No sign it had ever been standing, apart from the faint rectangle in the dirt where the foundation had been. I looked around for an hour, dug through the ruins a little. No blood, no podium, no pattern in the floor, just rubble. Whatever happened that night, whoever was in there running or whatever they were running from, there's no trace of it now. But every time I think about exploring something new, I remember that sound, boots on wood, and that fresh blood. And the worst part? I think whoever was running wasn't running at me. I think they were running from something I never saw, something that never made a sound. And that's what scares me most. Not what I heard, but what I didn't. Where I lived was so secluded that it would have been almost pointless to try and rob someone out there. Less than 5 cars probably came down that road on a good night, maybe even less than that if it was raining or snowing. Most people didn't even know it existed, and those that did had no reason to come out there unless they had something specific to do. I'd been living back in those woods for about 4 years, down an unmarked gravel road that cut off a half-paved county route and wound through a long tunnel of thick pine and oak before spilling out into a small clearing. That clearing was where my old trailer sat, leaning slightly to one side on the uneven cinder blocks I'd set it on. I liked it that way, quiet, out of the way, and forgotten. The woods behind my place were deep and dense. You could walk in and be out of sight in less than 10 steps. Sometimes I'd go hours without hearing anything other than wind or the low calls of owls. If I sat on the porch after dark with the lights off, it felt like the world didn't even exist beyond the trees. That was part of the appeal. No people, no problems. I didn't have much money, just enough to get by. I worked off and on doing odd jobs, tree cutting, hauling scrap, welding when I could find someone who needed something patched together. Most nights I just stayed home, listened to the scanner, drank a few beers, and passed out watching reruns on a small battery-powered TV. It was simple, and I didn't mind it being that way. There was only one neighbor in any real sense, and that was nearly a mile down the same road. Her name doesn't matter much, but she was quiet too, usually kept to herself. I'd helped her fix a flat once when she flagged me down, but we didn't talk much otherwise. Every now and then I'd see her taillights through the trees if she left in the evening, but most nights it was just pitch dark out there, thick with silence. One night, though, it wasn't silent, and it wasn't dark either. I'd been asleep maybe 2 hours when I heard a noise outside. It wasn't loud, not at first, just a kind of crunch, like someone stepping on dry leaves. At first, I figured it was a raccoon or maybe a deer, but something felt different. The steps were too slow, too steady, not like an animal. I sat up in bed, held my breath, and listened. A few seconds later, I heard another step, then another. They stopped near the side of the trailer. I didn't move for a long time, just sat there, heart pounding, ears straining. Then I heard a faint rustle, like fabric brushing against the aluminum siding. That got me out of bed. I moved real quiet to the kitchen, grabbed my flashlight and the old .22 I kept behind the water heater. I didn't turn the light on. I eased the door open just a crack and listened. Nothing. The air smelled like dirt and pine and a faint hint of cigarette smoke. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Nobody smoked out there. Nobody was supposed to be out there. I stepped out onto the porch, holding my breath, keeping the flashlight off. The moon was out, and I could make out the trees and the edge of the yard. I didn't see anything moving. I waited for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing stirred. Eventually, I chalked it up to maybe hearing things in my sleep. Maybe someone passed by on the road, tossed a cigarette out the window. Maybe the wind carried the sound. I didn't know, but I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. The next morning, I found a cigarette, but under the bedroom window. Fresh. Still smelled like it had been out no more than a few hours. I don't smoke, and I sure as hell didn't put it there. There were boot prints too. Faint, but definitely not mine. Bigger, heavier. Someone had been there. I walked the perimeter, followed the trail as far as I could through the woods. Whoever it was had come in from the west, cut through the trees, and left the same way. I found another cigarette farther in, stuck in a mossy stump like someone had been sitting there watching the trailer. That rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I didn't have enemies. I didn't have friends either, but nobody had reason to mess with me. Still, I didn't call the cops. There weren't enough of them around anyway, and by the time they got out there, whoever it was would be long gone. I started sleeping lighter, locking the doors tighter, making sure the rifle was loaded every night. Then one afternoon, a few weeks later, the neighbor lady came tearing up the road like hell was behind her. I'd never seen anyone drive that fast out there. She didn't stop, didn't slow down, just fishtailed around the bend and disappeared down toward the highway. Something about it didn't sit right with me. She wasn't the type to drive like that. I didn't see her for a couple days after that. Then one night, I was out back cutting wood when I noticed something caught in the bark of a tree. A strip of blue fabric, t-shirt material torn clean through. I walked a little farther into the woods and found more of it, caught on branches wrapped around twigs, and blood. Not a lot, but enough to make my stomach turn. I didn't know what to think. I followed the trail as far as I could. It led deeper into the woods, winding through places I didn't normally go. The brush was thick, and the path felt wrong, like someone had crashed through it in a panic. I lost it after about 20 minutes. When I came back to the trailer, I had that same sinking feeling again, like I wasn't alone, like someone had been watching me. I started keeping the lights off at night, sitting on the porch with the rifle across my lap, listening. I knew someone had been out there, but I didn't know why. A few nights later, I heard something again. This time it was clearer, movement in the woods, faster, more urgent. I stayed still, breathing slow. The noise came closer, then stopped. A few minutes passed. Then I heard the soft crunch of tires on gravel way down the road. I couldn't see anything, but I felt something then. Panic. Real panic. I went inside, locked the door, turned off every light. For the next half hour, I listened. The sound of a car idling somewhere out in the dark. Then it turned off. Silence. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring out the window, watching for any kind of movement, but nothing came. Around sunrise, I went out to check the road. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt and a cigarette but near the turnoff to my driveway. 2 days later, the neighbor came back. Her face was bruised. Her lip was split. She was shaking. She didn't say a word, just got in her car again and left. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that car, the cigarettes, the noise in the woods, the blood. I was convinced that every car that got behind us was her boyfriend. I didn't know him, never met him, but I could feel it. I knew it. She told me once, real fast when I fixed her tire, that she didn't trust him, said he had a temper, that he was the kind of guy you couldn't reason with once he got going. 3 nights after she came back, I heard something slam against the side of my trailer. Not a footstep, not a brush. This was a full-on crash, like someone hit it with their body. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the rifle, and ran to the back door. I didn't see anyone, but I heard someone running, through the trees, fast. That was it for me. I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to town. I didn't stop for anything, and I drove fast, almost 100 the whole way. Every time a set of headlights came up behind me, I was sure it was him. I didn't know where she went. I didn't know if he was following me or her or both of us, but I knew it wasn't safe anymore. I slept in my truck that night, parked behind a gas station near the edge of town. Next morning, I went to the sheriff's office, told them everything, gave them directions, showed them the tree with the blood on it, the cigarette butts, the tire tracks. They found her 2 days later, barely alive, hiding in a crawl space under an old hunting shack 3 miles deeper into the woods. He was dead. They found him not far from the trailer, shot through the chest, buried in a shallow grave behind a stand of pine trees. She did it with his own gun, said she was tired of running, tired of hiding. She didn't want to hurt anyone else. She'd been sleeping in the woods, moving every night, trying to stay out of sight. She thought he was still alive, thought he'd come back for her. That's why she ran when she saw headlights. That's why she never asked for help. They took her in, gave her a hot meal and a bed. I don't know what happened to her after that. I never saw her again. I sold the trailer a week later, moved out the same day, didn't even pack most of my stuff, just drove. Some places are too quiet, too far gone from everything else. You start to think you're alone, that nothing can touch you out there. But someone always can. And when they do, there's no one to hear you, no one to help, just the trees, and the dark, and whatever's out there waiting. Where I lived was so secluded that it would have been almost pointless to try and rob someone out there. Less than 5 cars probably traveled down that road on a good night. The woods pressed in on both sides, so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet in. Cell reception was spotty at best. If someone screamed out there, no one would hear. I liked it that way, or at least I used to. I moved out there for peace. That's what I told myself when I bought the place. It was an old cabin that needed more repairs than I had time or money for, but it sat on 4 acres of forest, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. I worked from home doing IT stuff for a logistics company. As long as I kept the satellite internet up, I could disappear from everything and still pay the bills. That night started like any other. It was early fall, not too cold yet, and the air smelled like damp pine. I spent the evening fixing one of the gutters and chopping some firewood. Afterward, I ate a quick dinner, watched the news on my laptop, and then shut everything down. It was pitch black outside, the kind of black that makes you forget what light even looks like. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and went to bed around 10. I woke up to something banging on the front door. Not a knock, not some soft tapping. It was a frantic, heavy pounding, like someone was using both fists. It was so loud it jolted me out of sleep like a slap. I sat up, heart hammering, ears straining. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was an animal, a bear even trying to get into the trash. But then it came again. 3 more hits, fast and hard. Someone was out there. I grabbed the shotgun I kept next to the bed. Not because I expected trouble, but because I lived so far out I wouldn't be able to call for help in time if anything serious happened. I crept down the hall, past the cold wood stove and the darkened kitchen, to the front door. There were no lights on outside, but I could see a shadow moving on the other side of the curtain. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak, but I stood there, frozen, trying to figure out what was going on. Then I heard something I wasn't expecting, crying, deep panic sobs, and through the edge of the curtain, I saw her. A woman, maybe mid-20s, barefoot, bleeding from her arms and face. She looked like she'd been through hell. I opened the door slowly, keeping the shotgun at my side, and she practically fell inside. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her shirt was torn. One eye was already swelling shut. Blood ran down her cheek and neck, and her hands were shaking so bad I thought she might collapse. She looked like she'd been running for miles. I shut the door, locked it, and backed away. I gave her space. She leaned against the wall, sobbing quietly, eyes darting around like she thought someone was going to crash through the windows. After a few minutes, she calmed enough to get one thing across. Her boyfriend had done this. She said it more than once, like it was the only thing she could focus on. She had run, barefoot through the woods, crashing through underbrush and thorns, just trying to get away. I didn't know how far she had come or how she even found my place in the dark. The first thing that came into my mind wasn't even fear for myself. It was fear that he might be following her. I went to the window and shut the curtain, then turned off every light in the cabin. I grabbed my keys and pointed toward the door. She understood and followed me back outside. I loaded her into my truck and peeled out of the driveway like the ground was on fire. I drove like a madman. Where I lived, like I said, was too secluded for crime to make sense. Being robbed or attacked out there just never crossed my mind. But in that moment, I was convinced that every single pair of headlights that appeared behind us was him. Her boyfriend, the guy who had beaten her half to death and let her bleed in the woods. Every time a car came into view, I pushed the speedometer harder. At one point, I hit almost 100 miles per hour on the narrow 2-lane highway. She clung to the door handle like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I kept glancing over, checking to make sure she was still conscious, still breathing. Her lip was split, and she had this far-off look, like she wasn't even in her body anymore. The hospital was almost 35 minutes away under normal conditions. I made it in just under 20. I pulled into the emergency entrance, jumped out, and yelled until a nurse came running. They got her into a wheelchair and rushed her inside while I stood there, sweating, trying to explain what little I knew. No, I didn't know her name. No, I didn't see what happened. She showed up at my house bleeding and terrified. That was all I could say. The cops showed up not long after. I gave them everything I had, which wasn't much. They asked if I'd seen a man near my property or any strange vehicles. I hadn't. Just her. Just a bloody, broken woman in the middle of the night, pounding on my door like she was about to be murdered. They told me she was stable but in bad shape. Multiple fractures, deep cuts, possible concussion. She hadn't told them much, just that she was attacked by her boyfriend and fled. They were trying to track him down. I didn't go home right away. I sat in the truck outside the ER for over an hour, staring at the steering wheel. My hands were still shaking. I don't know what I was more afraid of, that he was still out there or that he knew where she had gone. When I finally did head back, it was close to dawn. The sun was starting to come up, the sky a pale blue streaked with pink. But the trees still cast long shadows, and everything looked different, like the woods had changed overnight. I drove slow, slower than I ever had. I looked at every bend in the road, every driveway, every parked car. Part of me expected to see someone standing at the edge of the trees, watching. The cabin was just as I left it. The door was still locked. Nothing was broken or touched. But I walked the perimeter with the shotgun anyway, checking for footprints, tire marks, anything. I didn't find anything out of the ordinary, just the same silence that had always surrounded the place. I tried to sleep later, but couldn't. I kept seeing her face, the bruises, the blood, the fear. I kept thinking about how hopeless she must have felt, running through the dark, praying that someone, anyone, might be home. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept checking the local news for updates, but there was nothing. I called the sheriff's office once, just to ask if they caught the guy. They said they were working on it. She was still in the hospital, still recovering. They couldn't give me any more details. I didn't blame them, but that didn't help the way I felt. I didn't feel heroic. I didn't feel good about what happened. I felt sick, because I kept thinking about what could have gone differently. What if I hadn't heard the knocking? What if I'd been out that night? What if I'd been too afraid to open the door? I changed after that. I started locking the doors during the day. I added a second deadbolt, a security camera, and motion lights. I stopped walking in the woods alone. I carried a pistol on my belt, even when I was inside. Not because I thought he'd come back, but because I'd been reminded that the world doesn't care how far off the grid you go. Danger doesn't need a paved road or a street sign. Can come crashing out of the trees at any moment. Weeks passed, then months. I never saw her again. I don't even know her name, but I still think about her sometimes, especially when I drive that road at night, especially when I see headlights behind me. She lived. I know that much. She made it out, and maybe that's all that matters. But the truth is, that night changed something in me. I moved out there to escape the world, to find quiet. But now the silence feels different. Now it feels like waiting. It was early November, and the air had already turned sharp. I worked late that night, later than usual, wrapping up a backlog of reports for the county office. My job wasn't exciting, mostly processing land permits and environmental impact assessments. It was the kind of work that drained you slowly over time, not from excitement or stress, but from monotony. By the time I left the building, the parking lot was empty except for my pickup. My hands were cold as I unlocked the door, and I sat there for a few minutes just letting the heat kick in. The day had been long, and I felt like I hadn't seen my own house in weeks. I lived about 30 miles out, past a winding stretch of forest roads with nothing but pine trees and the occasional mailbox jutting out of the dark like a landmark from another world. There were no streetlights after the main highway, just the beams of my headlights cutting a narrow path forward. It wasn't uncommon to drive home without seeing another car. I didn't mind the isolation, I'd chosen it. I'd built the place myself, a little cabin tucked a mile off the county road, down a dirt drive that twisted and dipped through thick woods. I liked it that way. I liked hearing the wind and nothing else. The drive was uneventful until about a mile from home. That's when it happened. I rounded a curve, and out of nowhere, this figure came bursting out of the tree line on the right. She was covered in blood, arms, face, chest, and she wasn't walking, she was sprinting. She ran right into the road, waving her arms, screaming, but the sound didn't hit me until I was almost on top of her. Instinct took over. I swerved hard to the left, barely missing her. The tires caught the gravel shoulder, and I fought the wheel to keep from sliding. When I stopped, my heart was hammering. I sat frozen for a few seconds, staring into the rearview mirror, trying to process what I'd just seen. Then I slammed the truck into reverse and backed up fast. She was on her knees in the road now, shaking, her face streaked with tears and blood. I kept the doors locked but cracked the window as I pulled up beside her, not even knowing what to say or do. There was no way she was okay. I could see bruises forming already, blood smeared across her chest like something had been thrown at her, or worse. She was barefoot, and her feet were muddy and torn up. She couldn't speak clearly. She was panicked, hyperventilating, but what little I could piece together sent ice through my gut. Her boyfriend had beaten her. He was chasing her, and he was still in the woods. The hairs on my arms stood straight up. There was no way I was sitting around waiting. I unlocked the passenger door and she scrambled in, curled up against the door like she expected someone to reach through the window and pull her out. I didn't ask questions. I just threw the truck into gear and floored it. I drove as fast as I could, bouncing over potholes and washouts on the dirt road, barely slowing when I hit the highway. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's office. I didn't stop. I told them I was heading straight to the hospital and they could meet me there. I wasn't about to wait on the side of the road, not with someone chasing her in the middle of those woods. The ride to the hospital felt like it took forever. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights behind me. But there was nothing, just empty darkness. She didn't say much, just cried quietly. I passed her a blanket from the back seat and she clutched it like her life depended on it. I didn't ask her anything else. She was in no shape to talk. The police were already at the hospital when we arrived. I parked near the ER entrance and walked her inside. Nurses came running. They asked me questions, but I couldn't tell them much, just that she jumped in front of my truck, screaming for help. I told them what little she'd said. That was it. They took her back and I gave my statement to one of the deputies. He thanked me for helping, said they'd get someone out to that stretch of woods as soon as they could. He didn't say it, but I could tell he didn't expect to find the guy right away. Too much ground, too much cover. I didn't argue. I drove home a little slower that time. My hands were still shaking on the wheel, my shirt soaked with sweat even though the night was cold. When I finally got to my driveway, I sat there for a long time before pulling in. I kept thinking about the woods. I'd lived out there for years and never really felt afraid of them. But that night was different. It was like the trees were hiding something, like they'd watched her run for her life and just closed in behind her. I didn't sleep much. I sat up with a rifle next to the couch, watching the windows, listening to every noise outside. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office again. They said she was still in the hospital, stable but badly beaten. They hadn't caught the guy. They had officers out near the road where I found her, but no sign of him yet. I asked if they needed me to come down again, but they had everything they needed from me for now. For the next few days, I didn't leave the house unless I had to. I checked my trail cams, added more batteries, made sure the feed was saving properly. I didn't know if he knew where she'd run. I didn't know if he saw my truck. I didn't know if he was still out there, hiding, waiting for a chance. I kept the rifle with me at all times. When I showered, I set it against the bathroom sink. When I slept, it was under the bed. I checked the locks twice before bed, and every noise outside made me jump. I couldn't stop seeing her face. Bloody, terrified, eyes wild with fear. About a week later, the sheriff's office called me back. They'd found him. He wasn't far from where it happened. He'd been holed up in an old abandoned shack deep in the woods, maybe a half-mile from the road. A hiker had found a pile of clothes and trash nearby and called it in. Deputies had moved in and caught him trying to sneak out the back. He didn't fight, just gave up. They said he had a record: assault, drunk and disorderly, domestic violence in another state. No real address, no job history, just a name and a history of hurting people. I asked about the woman. They said she was staying with relatives in a different county now, recovering, getting help. She wasn't going back to him. She'd made that clear. I was relieved to hear it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not for me. I kept thinking about how she looked when she ran out of the trees, the way she screamed, how alone she must have felt in that moment. And I kept wondering what would have happened if I hadn't come around that bend when I did. If someone else had driven by and kept going, or if no one had come at all. Weeks passed. I tried to go back to normal. Work, home, repeat. But something had changed. I couldn't drive down that stretch of road without scanning the woods. I started carrying a pistol in my truck. I locked the gate at the end of my driveway every night. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about the woods, the way they'd swallowed her, the way they could hide something so evil so close to where I lived. That kind of fear sticks with you, not the kind you can talk yourself out of. It's not a ghost story. It's not some legend passed down through campfire whispers. It's real, flesh and blood, and it's out there, breathing, hiding in plain sight. I didn't stop living, but I stopped feeling safe. The forest I once loved became something else. And every time I hear a branch snap at night, I can't help but look over my shoulder. She survived. She got away. She's alive, and maybe that's all that matters in the end. But that road is different now, and so am I. It was almost 2:30 in the morning when I finally shut off the lights in my office and walked out to the parking lot. I'd been stuck at work for nearly 16 hours straight, finishing up inventory reports and dealing with a shipment that showed up 12 hours late. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, and I was the last one left. I felt drained, like my body was just going through the motions while my mind floated somewhere else. The only thing I could think about was getting home, kicking my boots off, and sleeping until the afternoon. The drive home was always a long one. I lived out in the middle of nowhere, technically still part of the county, but far enough off the main road that people would jokingly say I was halfway to Canada. My place sat at the end of a dirt road surrounded by woods on all sides. It was quiet, isolated, and peaceful, which I usually appreciated. But that night, after the long shift and the fog rolling in, it didn't feel as peaceful as it usually did. The highway was empty, just me and the occasional reflector post flying by. The road felt endless. I kept fiddling with the heat because it was early spring and the nights were still cold enough to make the windshield fog up. The deeper I got into the woods, the worse the fog got. It had that thick, heavy feel to it, like you were driving through smoke instead of air. My headlights could only pierce about 20 feet ahead. I turned the radio down, then off completely. No music was going to keep me awake. I just needed to focus and get home. The last stretch of road before my turnoff was a long, narrow 2-lane path with no lights, no shoulder, and just woods on both sides. I knew every curve and every tree along that road. That's why when I saw something jump out of the woods, I didn't have time to think. I just reacted. She came out of nowhere. 1 second, I was staring ahead into the fog, and the next, a woman leapt into the middle of the road. I swerved hard to the left, narrowly missing her, and jerked the wheel back to avoid the ditch on the other side. My tires skidded and kicked up gravel. My heart shot up into my throat. I kept going for maybe another 30 or 40 feet before I slammed on the brakes and stopped in the middle of the road. My hands were shaking. For a second, I just sat there, stunned. I could still see her in the rearview mirror, standing there with her arms up, covered in blood. She wasn't moving, just standing and screaming. It wasn't even words, just raw noise, high-pitched and panicked. I backed up, slowly. My reverse lights lit up the road behind me and the edges of the trees. She turned her head as I got closer. Her eyes were wide, and her mouth was open. She looked like she'd come straight out of a nightmare. Her clothes were torn, tank top, shorts, barefoot. She had blood down her face, her chest, all over her arms. Her skin was scraped and raw like she'd been running through the brush. I rolled down the window just enough to yell to her to get in. I kept checking the woods on both sides. I didn't see anyone else, but I wasn't about to wait. She opened the door and practically threw herself into the seat. She was shaking and grabbing at the door handle like she thought someone was right behind her. As soon as she slammed it shut, I hit the gas and started down the road toward the nearest hospital, which was over 20 minutes away. I asked her what happened. She couldn't get the words out at first. She was breathing like she'd been running for miles. She finally said her boyfriend had beaten her and that he was out there in the woods chasing her. They'd been camping, she said, way out where there's nothing. No houses, no traffic, nothing but trees for miles. I didn't ask anything else. I kept my eyes on the road, one hand on the wheel, the other fumbling with my phone. I called 911. My voice was shaking. I told the dispatcher everything as quickly as I could. I told them what road I was on, that I had a woman in my car who was bleeding and said her boyfriend had attacked her and was still out there. I told them I wasn't going to pull over. I told them we'd meet at the hospital, and if they wanted to intercept me on the road, they could. But there was no way I was going to stop with whoever was out there possibly following. They didn't argue. They just asked for details and kept me on the line. I gave them my license plate, the make and model of my truck, my name, everything. The dispatcher stayed calm the whole time, which helped me stay just a little bit grounded. Every now and then, I'd look at the woman in the passenger seat. She had her arms crossed over her chest, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. She kept looking behind us, like she was expecting headlights to appear from out of the fog. I tried not to think about how close I'd come to hitting her, or how easily this could have turned into a whole different story. The road out to the highway was bumpy and full of potholes, and I hit more than a few going faster than I should have. I didn't care. I just wanted to get away from those woods. Every time I looked into the trees on either side, I felt like I was being watched. The dispatcher let me know that an officer had been sent to the campsite, and another was heading to the hospital to meet us. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of the town. I took the back way into the emergency room entrance and pulled right up to the sliding glass doors. A nurse came running out before I even stopped, and the woman jumped out and ran inside without a word. I sat there, staring at the wheel, not sure what the hell had just happened. An officer pulled in behind me a minute later. I gave him a statement right there in the parking lot. He was calm, serious, and professional. I could tell this wasn't the first time he'd heard a story like this, which made it even more unsettling. I stayed at the hospital for about an hour. They took my statement again, asked me if I'd seen the boyfriend, what he looked like, if I'd noticed any other vehicles on the road. I hadn't. It had been dead silent, just fog and trees and that woman screaming. Eventually, they let me go. They said they'd keep me updated if they needed anything else. I asked if she'd be okay. The nurse told me she had a broken wrist, a few ribs that might be cracked, and dozens of cuts and bruises, but she was stable. I drove home slower than before. The adrenaline had worn off, and I felt like someone had taken a hammer to the inside of my skull. Every shadow on the road made me flinch. I kept seeing her face. How pale she looked, the blood down her neck, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder. When I finally got home, I sat in the truck for a long time before I went inside. I live alone. The The woods were quiet, too quiet. Even the usual night sounds, frogs, owls, crickets, seemed like they were holding their breath. I locked the door behind me and checked every window, every room, even though I knew no one was there. It was almost dawn by the time I laid down. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and listened for any sound outside. The next day, I got a call from the officer. They'd found the campsite. It was about 3 miles off the main road, down an old hunting path that hadn't been used in years. The tent was still there. So were her things and his. They said it looked like there had been a fight. Blood on the ground, torn clothes, a mess like someone had thrashed through the brush in a hurry. But they didn't find him. They searched the area for days. Dogs, drones, boots on the ground. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished. No one had seen him at any gas station. No traffic cams picked up a matching vehicle. No one using his ID or credit cards. The woman recovered. She gave her statement and they opened a warrant for the guy. Domestic abuse, attempted murder, the works. I didn't talk to her again, but the officers thanked me more than once for stopping. Said if I hadn't picked her up, she probably wouldn't have made it out. Weeks passed, then months. I never heard anything else. The guy was still missing. They said he must have had some kind of plan, maybe a stash out in the woods, maybe even lived out there full time. No one knew for sure. I still live in the same house. I still drive that same stretch of road almost every day, but I haven't felt the same about it since that night. I keep my eyes on the woods. I drive slower. I keep bear spray in the truck and a flashlight in the glove box. Every now and then, when the fog's heavy and the road's quiet, I get that same feeling that someone's watching, that someone's still out there, walking through the trees, looking for the woman who got away. But I don't stop anymore. Not for anything. Not even if someone jumps out in front of me. Because now I know what can be hiding in the dark, just off the road, deep in the woods. And some things you only survive once.